Christmas Eve had always been my favorite day of the year, or at least it used to be. The smell of cinnamon and pine, the twinkling lights on the tree, the laughter that seemed to fill every corner of the house, all of it was supposed to make the season magical. But this year was different. This year I was alone. It wasn't the first time I'd spent a holiday alone, but it was the first time I'd been rejected so openly. That morning, my mom had slammed the door in my face, leaving me standing on the porch in the biting cold. Her words had been sharp and dismissive, full of resentment I didn't understand. "I don't have time for this," she'd said. And with that, she had disappeared into her world of holiday preparations, leaving me behind. I had begged her to at least wish me Merry Christmas, to acknowledge that I was still her daughter, but she had turned away, leaving nothing but the sound of the door slamming echoing in my ears. Back in my small apartment, I tried to recreate the warmth I once knew. I strung up the few lights I had on a tiny, artificial Christmas tree, their soft glow casting long shadows against the walls. I pulled out an old box of ornaments, some chipped, some faded from years of use, and placed them on the branches as carefully as I could. I wanted it to feel festive, to feel like a Christmas that mattered, but the silence around me was deafening. I set to work on baking cookies, hoping that at least the sweet smell of sugar and butter would chase away the emptiness. Flour dusted the counter, and dough stuck stubbornly to my fingers, but I forced a smile as I worked. In the past, this had been a fun activity, something my mom and I did together. Now it felt hollow, a reminder of what I had lost. Every laugh I used to share with her seemed like it belonged to someone else, in another life. I realized how much I had taken for granted. The little arguments, the shared recipes, even the moments of frustration, they had all been part of a family I no longer had access to. As I sat down on the edge of my couch, holding a plate of slightly burnt cookies, I stared at the tree. The lights flickered softly, but they did little to brighten the heavy weight pressing down on my chest. I tried to think of happy memories, tried to remind myself that family could still exist in other forms, in other people, but the ache in my heart was relentless. Outside, the wind rattled against the windows, sending shivers down my spine. I wrapped a blanket around myself and pulled my knees close. This was my reality now. A quiet apartment, a small tree, and the lingering sting of rejection. I closed my eyes and whispered a quiet wish into the empty room. Somebody, anyone, just show up. I didn't know if it was hope or desperation that made me say it, but it was all I had. And little did I know, someone was about to answer that wish, someone who would change everything that night. I was just beginning to accept the quiet of my lonely Christmas Eve when I heard it, a knock at the door. Not the soft, casual kind that might come from a neighbor, but a firm, deliberate knocking that echoed through the small apartment. My heart skipped a beat. Who could it be at this hour, on a night like this? I hesitated, unsure if I should even get up. The city outside was alive with the distant sounds of carolers, bells, and laughter drifting from nearby apartments, a cruel reminder of the warmth I didn't have. Slowly, I stood and walked to the door, my bare feet brushing against the cold floor. I peered through the peephole, expecting perhaps a delivery or a neighbor returning a lost item. But what I saw made me freeze. Standing in the snowy glow of the hallway was a man I hadn't seen in years. Tall, imposing, yet carrying a quiet elegance in the way he held himself. His coat was expensive, perfectly tailored, snowflakes clinging to the shoulders, and his eyes, locked onto mine as if he could see through the door, through the walls, through every bit of sadness I had been trying to hide. It was him. My grandpa. I hadn't expected him. In fact, I hadn't even imagined he remembered me at all. He had always been distant, a shadow in my early childhood memories, a figure whose presence was more felt than seen. And yet, here he was, standing outside my door on Christmas Eve, looking straight at me. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the lock, the cold air biting at my fingers. When I finally opened the door, he stepped in without a word. The snowflakes clung to his hair and coat, and I instinctively reached for a towel to brush them off, but he waved me away. His gaze never left mine, and in it, I saw something I hadn't expected: recognition, curiosity, and an unmistakable warmth. It was the look of someone who had missed years and wanted to make them count in a single evening. "Grandpa, what are you doing here?" I whispered, my voice barely audible, choked with disbelief and a hint of hope. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow step into the living room, scanning the modest space I had tried to make festive. His eyes softened as they landed on the small tree, the crooked ornaments, the plate of cookies I had attempted to bake. "You've done well with what you have," he said quietly, finally breaking the silence. His voice carried authority, warmth, and the weight of someone who had seen much of the world and yet was here, focused entirely on me. I felt a mixture of emotions, relief, awe, and a deep, aching curiosity about why he had come. The loneliness that had been suffocating me only moments ago began to lift slightly, replaced by a fragile hope that this Christmas might not be completely lost after all. Something told me that tonight, the quiet of my apartment was about to be filled with more than just the glow of the tree lights. Something told me that tonight, my grandpa had come to show me that I wasn't as alone as I thought. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the heater and the soft flicker of the Christmas lights. I felt an unusual mix of anticipation and nervousness, as if this single moment could change everything. His eyes stayed fixed on mine, calm yet piercing, and I felt like he could see every hidden corner of my heart. The loneliness, the hurt, the longing I had tried so hard to hide. "Sit," he finally said, his voice low but firm. I hesitated, unsure if I deserved the invitation. Then, cautiously, I sank onto the couch, clutching the blanket around me like a shield. He chose the armchair across from me, sitting with a straight back, exuding a quiet authority that seemed both intimidating and comforting at once. The snow from outside had left faint dampness on his shoes, but he didn't seem to notice, or perhaps it didn't matter to him. For a long while, we just looked at each other. No words, no explanations, just presence. It was strange how powerful that silence felt. In that quiet, I felt seen in a way I hadn't felt for years. My mom's rejection, the empty apartment, the failed attempts to make this Christmas special, all of it seemed to fade slightly under his gaze. It was as if his presence alone was saying, "You matter, and I am here now." Finally, he leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped together. "I've watched you," he said quietly. "More than you realize." My heart skipped a beat. Even when I wasn't here, I noticed. "I knew what you were going through." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of someone who had kept a careful watch over my life from a distance. I wanted to argue, to say he had no right to judge my struggles, but I couldn't. There was truth in his voice. I don't know what to say," I admitted, my voice trembling. "I've been so alone tonight. And for so many years, I thought. I stopped, unsure how to explain the ache I had carried all this time." He gave a small, understanding nod. "You don't need to say anything yet," he replied. "Sometimes, it's enough to just be here, to acknowledge each other." He paused, and for the first time, a small smile touched his lips. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I felt its warmth ripple through me. It was a smile that said, "I've come for you, and I'm not leaving yet." We sat in silence again, but it was different this time. There was no awkwardness, no tension, just a fragile, growing connection. I realized that this moment, simple as it seemed, was a turning point. For the first time in years, I felt the possibility of family, not the broken version I had grown used to, but something real, alive, and meaningful. He glanced toward the small tree, then back at me. "Let's talk," he said gently. "I want to hear about you. Everything you've been through. Everything you've dreamed of. This Christmas isn't over, not for us." And in that instant, I believed him. After the silence had settled, my grandpa leaned back in his chair and let out a quiet sigh, as if the weight of years had been pressing on him too. He studied the room briefly, taking in the small tree, the slightly burnt cookies on the plate, and the faded ornaments that held memories of holidays long past. Then his gaze returned to me, steady and unwavering. I remember your childhood, he began, his voice calm but heavy with nostalgia. The way you would run through the house on Christmas morning, carrying presents with such excitement. You were fearless, full of joy, and full of heart. He paused, letting the words settle. I blinked back tears, surprised that he remembered the smallest details. For years, I had felt invisible to him, like a distant memory he had long forgotten. But hearing him speak, I realized he had been paying attention all along. He told me stories I had never heard, of his own childhood Christmases, of the mistakes he made, of the family tensions that had pulled us apart. Each story revealed a side of him I hadn't known. Not the distant, stoic figure from family gatherings, but a man who had loved deeply, struggled silently, and carried regrets he rarely shared. I listened, captivated, as he spoke of decisions that had led him away from us, of missed opportunities, and of the times he had watched from afar, quietly proud of the small victories I had achieved on my own. You've been stronger than I ever realized, he said, his eyes glistening slightly. Even when life made things hard, you never gave up. I saw it. I always did. The sincerity in his voice struck me, and for the first time that evening, I allowed myself to fully feel the emotion I had been holding back for years: relief, gratitude, and an overwhelming sense of being understood. I shared some of my own struggles, how lonely I felt growing up, the sting of my mom's recent rejection, the moments when I thought I had no one. He listened patiently, nodding occasionally, never interrupting. He didn't offer cliches or empty reassurances. Instead, he acknowledged my pain, validating every word I spoke, which was something I hadn't experienced in a long time. After a while, he leaned forward again and smiled, just slightly. Life isn't about perfection or getting it right all the time. It's about the moments you make count, the courage to keep going, the love you choose to give, and the people you let in, even if it's late. That's what matters. His words were gentle, yet powerful, and I felt them seep deep into my heart. For the first time in years, I realized that my grandpa hadn't come just to visit. He had come to remind me of something I had almost forgotten: that family could exist beyond mistakes and missed opportunities. That love, even if delayed or imperfect, could heal old wounds. And that, sometimes, the people who truly care show up in ways we least expect, changing everything in a single evening. By the time he paused, the warmth in the room had shifted. The heaviness that had weighed on my heart all day began to lift, replaced by a cautious hope. I no longer felt invisible. I no longer felt completely alone. And I knew that this Christmas, no matter what else happened, would mark the beginning of something new, something real. After hours of talking, sharing memories and feelings long buried, my grandpa stood up and stretched. I think it's time for a little Christmas tradition, he said, a subtle spark of mischief in his eyes. I frowned, unsure what he meant. Our Christmas traditions had always been simple, quiet affairs: decorating the tree, baking cookies, exchanging small gifts. But something in his tone told me this was going to be different. He moved toward the small tree I had set up, crouching slightly as he surveyed the ornaments and lights. Then, almost like a magician revealing a secret, he gestured toward a small pile of neatly wrapped gifts I hadn't noticed before. They were arranged carefully in the corner, each one perfect, pristine, and surprisingly thoughtful. I froze, unable to speak. "These are for you," he said softly, his gaze meeting mine. "I know these won't fix everything, and I know they can't make up for lost time, but I wanted you to have something special this Christmas." I approached cautiously, picking up the smallest package. It was delicate, wrapped in deep red paper with a golden ribbon. I untied it carefully, my hands trembling. Inside was a necklace, simple but elegant, the kind of piece that felt timeless. I lifted it from the box and noticed the engraving, a date from my childhood and my initials. My breath caught in my throat. He had remembered. He had remembered the little things that mattered most. Tears blurred my vision as I looked up at him. How did you know?" I whispered. He smiled gently, a warmth in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. "Because I never forgot you," he said. "Even when I wasn't there, I carried these memories with me. I wanted you to know that no matter what happens, someone has always been rooting for you. Someone has always believed in you. I felt the weight of years of loneliness and longing lift slightly from my chest. Here was someone who truly saw me, who remembered the little things, who cared enough to make this moment unforgettable. I hugged him tightly, and for the first time in years, I felt truly safe. Then he handed me another gift, larger this time, and I opened it carefully. Inside were books I had longed for, a journal, and even a small photo album filled with pictures of my younger self, smiling and laughing in ways I hadn't remembered. He had pieced together fragments of my past, honoring the girl I once was and the woman I was becoming. "This Christmas isn't about the gifts," he said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It's about remembering who we are, who we love, and the connections we sometimes take for granted. I hope these remind you that you are never truly alone." I sat back, holding the necklace in my hands and staring at the gifts. I felt a surge of emotions, gratitude, wonder, disbelief, and, above all, rekindled sense of hope. This Christmas, the warmth I had thought lost forever returned, carried not by the lights or the cookies, but by the presence of someone who had finally come when it mattered most. And in that moment, I knew that this was only the beginning of a night I would never forget. After the gifts had been opened and the initial excitement faded, my grandpa sank back into the armchair, his eyes still warm but thoughtful. The room felt lighter now, the glow of the tree reflecting softly on the walls, but the most important light wasn't from the bulbs. It was the one he brought into the space simply by being there. "Do you know why I really came tonight?" he asked, his voice gentle but serious. I shook my head, curious and a little apprehensive. "It's not just about the gifts, or even about seeing you after all these years. It's about perspective, about understanding life in a way you sometimes can't from your own corner of the world." I listened closely as he spoke, realizing that his words carried decades of experience, wisdom shaped by mistakes and triumphs alike. "Life isn't fair," he said plainly, "and families aren't perfect. But there is always a way to respond with kindness, with understanding, and with courage. That's what separates those who carry bitterness from those who carry hope." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on mine. "You see, Christmas, or any holiday, isn't about perfection. It's about connection. It's about showing up, not just in the big moments, but in the small ones too. A smile, a listening ear, even a quiet presence can mean more than any gift or gesture." I thought of my mom, how she had slammed the door in my face, and I felt a familiar wave of hurt. He seemed to anticipate it. "I know it stings. I know it feels like abandonment," he said softly. "But anger and resentment are heavy burdens. Holding on to them doesn't punish the person who hurt you. It only weighs down your own heart. Forgiveness isn't about excusing someone else's actions. It's about freeing yourself." His words struck me more deeply than I expected. I realized how much I had carried, the rejection, the loneliness, the countless nights feeling unseen. And here was someone who had faced similar struggles, someone who had known disappointment and distance in his own family, and yet had chosen to come to me now, to reach across the years, instead of letting resentment control him. He smiled faintly, a spark of warmth in his eyes. "This is why I'm here. Not to fix the past, but to help you see that you can carry hope into your future. You can choose love, connection, and understanding, even when life seems unfair. That is what truly matters." I felt a lump in my throat, and for the first time in years, I let myself truly believe him. These weren't just words, they were a lifeline, a map for navigating a world that often felt cold and unyielding. His presence, his advice, his quiet understanding, it was more powerful than anything I had expected from a single Christmas night. As he sat back, the room filled with a quiet warmth that no holiday decorations could create, I realized something important. Christmas had returned to me, not through presents or lights, but through the lessons he had shared and the hope he had instilled. That night, I felt a shift in my heart, a small but profound transformation that would stay with me long after the snow melted and the tree was packed away. And for the first time that evening, I truly understood what it meant to feel seen, valued, and loved. After a moment of quiet reflection, my grandpa leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his eyes serious but gentle. "I want to talk about your mom," he said. My chest tightened. I had spent hours earlier feeling angry, hurt, and betrayed, and the thought of revisiting it was almost painful. Yet something about his presence made me willing to listen. "She's complicated," he began, choosing his words carefully. "Not in a bad way, just human. Life has tested her in ways you might not fully understand. She makes mistakes, just like everyone else, and sometimes those mistakes hurt the people she loves most, including you." I swallowed hard, the familiar sting of betrayal rising again. "She slammed the door on me, Grandpa. She didn't even say Merry Christmas. How can that be love?" I asked, my voice trembling. Grandpa nodded slowly. "I know it hurts. And yes, that action was wrong. But love isn't always perfect. Sometimes people show it in ways we don't recognize, or in ways that fail completely. The key is to separate intention from action, to see her heart even when her behavior confuses you." I frowned, struggling to reconcile his words with my raw emotions. "I've tried to forgive, but it feels impossible." "That's normal," he replied softly. "Forgiveness doesn't happen instantly. It takes time, reflection, and sometimes guidance. But empathy can be a start. Try to see what drives her choices. Consider her struggles, her fears, her regrets. Sometimes understanding doesn't excuse the action, it just gives you the power to heal yourself." He paused, giving me a moment to absorb his words. "I've watched you grow, and I see your strength. You've endured rejection, loneliness, and disappointment. And yet, here you are, still capable of love, still willing to consider what it means to reconnect. That's extraordinary." I felt my throat tighten, a lump forming as emotions I had buried for years surfaced. I realized that my grandpa wasn't telling me to forget my hurt or pretend it didn't exist. He was guiding me toward a perspective I had never considered, seeing my mom as a person, flawed and human, rather than just the woman who abandoned me on Christmas Eve. "Family isn't just blood," he continued. "It's connection, effort, and presence. And sometimes that connection has to be rebuilt slowly. One step, one conversation, one moment of understanding at a time. You have the chance to do that if you choose." I glanced at the small tree, the ornaments, the glowing lights, and thought about my mom, her temper, her frustration, but also the love I remembered from earlier Christmases. For the first time that evening, I didn't feel only anger. I felt curiosity, empathy, and even a flicker of hope. Grandpa smiled, a soft, approving expression. Christmas is about reconciliation, about hope, and about giving love, even when it's hard. Sometimes the people we think have left us forever are just waiting for the right moment to return. Maybe this can be that moment for you and your mom. I nodded slowly, understanding that the night was about more than gifts or surprises. It was about healing, connection, and the quiet courage to open my heart again. And with my grandpa by my side, I felt ready to take that first step, however small, toward rebuilding a family that had seemed lost forever. The conversation with my grandpa left a warmth lingering in the room that no Christmas lights or cookies could create. It wasn't just his words, it was the way he listened, the way he understood, the way he made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. I realized that this night, which had begun in loneliness and rejection, was turning into something remarkable. We decided to share more than words, we shared memories. Grandpa asked about my childhood, and I spoke about little moments. My first school performance, the time I accidentally broke a vase, the nights I stayed up trying to finish a school project. With each story, he laughed softly, sometimes shaking his head in disbelief, sometimes smiling proudly. And for the first time, I laughed too, not the nervous, forced laugh I sometimes used to hide discomfort, but genuine laughter that made my chest ache pleasantly. Then he began telling stories of his own childhood, stories I had never heard before. Tales of Christmases in a big old house, where the tree was taller than he was and the air smelled of pine and baked apples. Stories of mistakes he had made as a young man, regrets he had carried, and the people he had loved but sometimes failed to understand. I listened, fascinated, as if a window into another world had opened in my tiny apartment. We shared hot chocolate, the mugs warming our hands and hearts. The snow outside fell quietly, creating a soft white blanket over the streets, muffling the world beyond my apartment walls. I realized that the night wasn't just about catching up, it was about connection. It was about two people, separated by years and circumstance, choosing to be fully present with each other, to fill the void left by absence with attention, care, and love. "Do you remember the tree we had when you were little?" Grandpa asked suddenly, his eyes twinkling. "The one where you insisted every ornament had a perfect spot?" I smiled, nodding. "I remember," I said softly. "You would scold me for moving them around, but then you'd laugh when I argued about it." He chuckled. "I think that's why I've always remembered you. You have such determination, even in the smallest things. You fight for what matters, and that's why you've thrived despite everything life threw at you." I felt tears prick my eyes again. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of being understood. In his presence, my frustrations, my loneliness, my insecurities, they all seemed smaller, more manageable. Here was someone who had missed years, yet managed to arrive at the exact right moment, bridging the gap with warmth and wisdom. By the time the night grew late, we were no longer just grandpa and granddaughter separated by distance and time. We were two people sharing the quiet magic of Christmas, the kind that isn't in gifts or decorations, but in laughter, understanding, and the profound simplicity of being seen. As I finally leaned back on the couch, the room bathed in soft light, I realized that the connection we had built tonight was stronger than any resentment or hurt. This night of stories, laughter, and presence would stay with me forever, a reminder that love often arrives when we least expect it, but exactly when we need it most. By the time the clock ticked past midnight, the soft glow of the Christmas lights had transformed the room into a cocoon of warmth and memory. The earlier tension, the ache of loneliness, the sting of rejection, they all felt distant now. I had spent hours with my grandpa, listening, sharing, laughing, and even crying, and in that time, a quiet transformation had begun within me. Grandpa leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his lap. "You know," he said, his tone gentle but certain, "this night isn't just a fleeting moment. It's a chance to start something new, something lasting." I tilted my head, curious and cautious. "What do you mean?" I asked. He looked at me intently, as if weighing his words carefully. "You've endured a lot and you've grown stronger because of it. But the future doesn't have to repeat the mistakes of the past. You have the power to shape your life, your relationships, and your happiness from here on out." I nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. It wasn't advice I had expected. It wasn't a lecture or a platitude. It was a roadmap, gently laid out for someone who had spent too long wandering in uncertainty. "I want you to promise me something," he continued. "Promise me that you will not let bitterness control your heart. Promise me that you will reach out to the people you love, even if it's scary. And promise me that you'll carry the lessons from tonight forward, into your life, your choices, and your future." "I promise," I whispered, feeling the gravity of those words settle deep within me. It wasn't just a promise to him, it was a promise to myself, to the little girl I once was, and to the woman I was becoming. He smiled, a soft, proud expression that made my heart ache with warmth. "Good," he said, "because I'll always be here for you, no matter what. You don't have to face life alone, and you don't have to carry your burdens by yourself." Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, handing it to me carefully. "This is something for you," he said. "Not a gift in the traditional sense, but a tool. Guidance, contacts, advice, things that will help you navigate the challenges ahead. I want you to know that I am invested in your life, that I care, and that I believe in you." I opened the envelope and found a series of notes, letters, and even a small notebook he had kept, filled with advice and encouragement. It was overwhelming, the thought that someone had spent time preparing this, thinking about me, and ensuring I had support even beyond this night. I hugged the envelope to my chest, tears streaming down my face. Grandpa placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "This Christmas isn't just about today," he said softly. "It's about tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days to come. Carry tonight with you. Remember the lessons, and always know that you are loved." I felt a surge of hope that I hadn't felt in years. The loneliness, the rejection, the fear, they weren't gone completely, but they were no longer insurmountable. With my grandpa's presence, wisdom, and unwavering support, I felt ready to face whatever came next. And as he finally stood to leave, I realized that this night had changed me forever, not just for Christmas, but for life. As the night grew quieter, snow still drifting gently against the windows, my grandpa prepared to leave. The air outside was cold, the streets covered in a pristine white blanket, but inside my apartment, I felt a warmth that no winter could touch. The room glowed softly from the Christmas lights, reflecting the transformation that had taken place in my heart over the past hours. He turned to me, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. "Remember," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "family isn't about perfection. It isn't about gifts, traditions, or even appearances. Family is about showing up, being present, and caring, even when it's hard. That's what matters most." I nodded, overwhelmed with gratitude, my eyes glistening. For so long, I had believed I was invisible, abandoned, and alone. But tonight, he had shown me otherwise. In a single evening, he had bridged the gap that years of absence had created, reminding me that love and connection can arrive unexpectedly, even when hope feels faintest. He smiled, a small, approving expression that carried years of wisdom. "This Christmas is only the beginning," he said. "Use it as a starting point. Reach out, reconnect, and carry the love you've experienced tonight forward. Life is short, but moments like these last forever." I felt a lump in my throat. His words weren't just about me, they were about life itself. They were about seizing the opportunities to forgive, to embrace, and to connect before it's too late. I realized how much I had grown tonight, not just in understanding my grandpa, but in understanding myself. I could face the world differently now, with hope, courage, and the knowledge that someone believed in me unconditionally. He bent slightly, as if to whisper a secret, and said, "Call me anytime. Always. I'll never turn away. You're never alone." Tears slipped down my cheeks as I hugged him tightly, clinging to the warmth of his presence. The apartment, the tiny tree, the modest gifts, all of it paled compared to the gift he had brought: attention, understanding, and love. He stepped back reluctantly, glancing around the room one last time. Then, quietly, he opened the door and disappeared into the snowy night. I watched him go, feeling the crunch of snow under his shoes fade away, but the warmth he left behind stayed firmly in my chest. I realized, with a mix of awe and relief, that I was no longer the lonely, rejected girl who had begun the evening feeling invisible. I was someone who had been seen, heard, and cherished, even in the most unexpected way. Sitting by the tree, I held the gifts close and let the tears fall freely. The glow of the lights reflected in my eyes as I whispered a quiet thank you, not just to my grandpa, but to the universe for reminding me that love can arrive even when we think it's lost. That Christmas, I learned a lesson I would carry forever. Family is not perfect, life is not perfect, but love can still find its way. And sometimes, it shows up exactly when you need it the most, looking you in the eye, changing everything in a single, unforgettable moment. That night I realized Christmas had finally come home.